Molly, do you have our official introductions, or would you like me to just get started?
Okay.
I think we're live, Mary.
Okay.
We're ready to go, and we were waiting for some kind of introduction. I will do the introductions today. Okay. So hi, everybody. It's Carolyn Ducey here with the Quiltside Chats, along with my buddy, Mary Fons, who is going to talk to us about a really, really interesting woman and quilt maker and just kind of a force in her lifetime, Bertha Meckstroth. So, Mary, I know you've got a lot to tell us. So, I think everybody knows me. Are there any things that you're doing right now? I know you got an announcement at the end of the show, yes. But anything else as far as an introduction that you'd want to share with our guests before we get started?
Just that it feels like it's gone by like that, but I mean, I've been around doing this stuff, in the quilt world, in different capacities for, it's like 12 years or something now. I started making quilts with my mom and working with my mom, and then, I guess it's like 6 years ago or so, I started to really like, what you do, which is, researching and writing. And I don't curate much yet, but I really love the history and the context of quilts, so much more than making them these days. So I've really thrown myself into that, and I love to lecture, and I lectured at QuiltCon, a version of what I'm going to share today about Bertha Meckstroth. And I don't think I've ever had more fun up there. I love to lecture so much, and because I love to share what I'm learning, and so it was really, really fun to talk about Bertha and what I've been doing with her story lately. I'm kind of addicted to working on it, but it doesn't pay me anything, so it's kind of a problem.
But those pesky details.
I know. So I'm still with Quilt Folk. I've been with Quilt Folk since 2016, and I have a paper coming out in Uncoverings in 2024 about quilts and fine art. So that's exciting because it's my first one.
Yay! Congratulations! You have been very, very busy.
Yes, that doesn't pay me either, really. So yeah. If anyone wants to, I actually wanted to say this. If anybody out there saw the Bertha Meckstroth lecture at QuiltCon, you know how much fun it was. And I've given lectures at quilt guilds and all over the place for 12 years. And I would love to give this Bertha, the full version of the Bertha Meckstroth lecture. So get in touch with me and let me know, because the surprise I have at the end has to do with the fact that I should probably book some gigs. Because I'm going to make less money. Anyway, I'll tell you later.
Oh, great. Well, we have a substantial number of Bertha's quilts here at the collection, so I'm really excited whenever someone chooses to do research on our quilts or on someone who makes some of our quilts. It's just great because it gives us such a wonderful story. So Molly is behind the scenes. There she goes. She's ready with your slides. So Mary, take it away. If we get questions, I'll let you know. But I can't wait to learn more.
Okay, cool. Thanks for having me. Thank you very much. Well, so the quilt that I picked to talk about is this quilt, which is really just kind of it's a place to jump off talking about this woman, Bertha Amelia Meckstroth. I've got close-ups of this quilt, Mary of Nazareth. At the museum, it's listed as original. And I'm pretty sure that the official name is Mary of Nazareth from some of the research that I've done. So the quilt is extraordinary. But like I said, it's sort of a way to get us talking about Bertha. This quilt is 99.5 inches by 48.5 inches. It's an unusual size, or those are unusual dimensions. It was made in 1929. And I've got close-ups of it. Molly, the next 4 slides are close-ups of this quilt. And I was able to take these. My friend Willow took these pictures at the Quilt Museum. I think it was in like late May, Carolyn, or June, when Elizabeth and I were there. And so I have these really nice detail shots to show you. So this quilt is made with a trapunto, a stuffed work. And also reverse way. And a little bit of background. But anyway, so this quilt is unusual. It's not a bed quilt. It's a quilt that is meant to be hung. And for me, when I think about the art quilt movement, and when it really came here, I mean, there's stuff happening in the 60s and into the 70s. But when I think about art quilts, quilts made for the wall and not the bed, is the simplistic, definition I've heard. And for someone to be making something like this in 1929 is different, right? It's unusual, just that it was made in this way and that it was made for hanging on the wall. So there's let's see. I've shown a picture to Molly. The next slide is a picture of Mary of Nazareth's skirt, and what you're seeing is a piece of fabric, very thin fabric, layered over the blue, and then these stuffed work pieces, these almost sculptural elements, gestures in the cloth that are then stuffed. So it gives this really incredible dimension. The figure of Mary of Nazareth, it has all of this depth and movement in her shroud and certainly in her face as well. And so that quilt is one of many extraordinary quilts made by this woman. Next slide, Bertha Meckstroth. And Bertha Meckstroth was born, and please interrupt me at any time. I'm just kind of going and I'll just be quiet if you want to jump in. So Bertha was born in 1875 in Le Sueur, Minnesota. She was quite a character. And I should tell you, too, that I have many sources that I've gotten this information from. Bertha Meckstroth's papers are at the Louisiana State University Special Collections Library. I'll talk about a few of the things that are in there. I've gotten information from a really wonderful article by Joyce Gross that was written in 1981 in the Quilter's Journal magazine. I've also gotten information from some of the things that have been written about her in books. Mary Kay Waldvogel wrote a piece in a book recently, but Bertha's been mentioned a number of times, in published works. The Quilt Museum's the second book, The Modern Age, Quilts in the Modern Age, is that the one? There's an entry about Bertha in there too. But I first heard of her. This sounds like I'm talking about books. In 2021, there was an exhibit by the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. Many of you watching will recognize that or will have heard about that. Some of you may have seen the show. Bertha Meckstroth is in this book as well, because a quilt of hers was in that exhibition. And it was when I got this book, Mom and I were going to go to the show, but COVID was raging and we just decided to cancel the trip. But when I opened this book and saw, this quilt by Bertha Meckstroth, it's a quilt with a yellow cross on it. I was fascinated by her story, and that's how I was introduced to her. So anyway, there's many sources, and I can tell you more about those if you're interested. But she was born in 1875, and she was this character. She was quite short. She walked with a limp, and different sources have said she had a club foot. Some sources have said that she had an undiagnosed case of polio when she was a child, but she walked with a limp and was quite small in stature. A friend of hers described her as looking like Mrs. Tiggywinkle from Beatrix Potter, which, with friends like these, like not a flattering portrait, but it's true. She was short. She drove like a bat out of hell, from what I've read. And she was very brash. She was really direct and just sort of, she was kind of eccentric by all accounts. She was born into a family, her husband was, her father was a doctor. She never married, by the way. And her mother died when she was pretty young. I think Bertha was about 6 years old when her mother died, and her father died pretty young as well. So she lived with her housekeeper, Jane Sawyer, who taught her how to quilt. Bertha, something really very special happened to Bertha when she was a young woman. She went to the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And when she was there, she met someone who would change her life. She met a woman named Bessie Potter Vano. And Bessie Potter was a sculptress. And she was part of a group so interesting. She was part of a group of female sculptors who they called themselves the White Rabbits. And this is kind of a tangential thing, but it's so interesting. When they were building the World's Fair, Daniel Burnham and all of that in Chicago in 1893, that really put Chicago on the map, that fair. Daniel Burnham said to the man who was in charge of all the sculpture at the fair that he had to work faster. He had to get more help. And the man was a teacher at the Art Institute of Chicago, and he was working with a group of female sculptors. And he said, well, Mr. Burnham, I could bring in these very talented women if you'll, allow me to bring in these female sculptors. And Daniel Burnham said, I don't care if you bring in white rabbits, get it done. And so these women did so much of the sculpting, and they called themselves the White Rabbits. Anyway, so Bertha went to the fair, and she met this woman, and she was so inspired by her work. And Bessie Potter is a very famous sculptress. And Bertha decided that she wanted to do that. She wanted to be a sculptress as well. So she enrolled eventually at the Art Institute, and she studied with that man. I think Leo, forgetting his name at the moment, but she couldn't finish. She didn't finish school. She dropped out of art school because she couldn't lift the heavy stones that were required for some of the lessons and things. She was not able to do it. Also, she did not get much encouragement from her teachers. So she quit, and she enrolled instead at Radcliffe to study nursing. And she did graduate from Radcliffe in 1906. But there's a really important part of Bertha's earlier story that had a lot to do with how she was able to make the work that she did. Her sister, Anna, older sister, got married to a man named Richard Sears. And when she married Richard Sears in Chicago, he was not yet Sears of Sears and Roebuck, but he became Sears of Sears and Roebuck. So Bertha called him the merchant prince. Bertha's sister was married to this man with extraordinary wealth. Imagine, just unbelievable amount of money started pouring into their family. And that's how she got to go to Radcliffe, and Anna doted on Bertha. She loved her a lot. And so they bought a house for Bertha and in Glencoe. And I have definitely driven past that house. And eventually I'm going to get up the guts to talk to the owners and see if I can go in and take a look, because ultimately I'd like to write a book about Bertha, which we'll get to. But she was supplied with the greatest gift any quilt maker could have. She was given fabric from Anna. Sears had all of the finest Chinese raw silk and satins, and she just got whatever she wanted when she started making her quilts. Now, I'm going to show you a bunch of the quilts here in just a second, but what was really incredible about her entry into quilt making, and let me just grab this, actually. I want to read something that she wrote. Yes, here. So this is an article she wrote for, I'll read an excerpt from it. She gave money to Radcliffe many years later, and she wrote a piece for the Radcliffe Quarterly. And this is a bit from that article here. Quote, "My storehouse is in Casa Tranquilla in Glencoe, Illinois." She called her house Casa Tranquilla, okay. "Where for a quarter of a century have been sheltered and stored in chests the fruits of activities which grew out of my peculiar education at the Art Institute of Chicago and Radcliffe College. The idea evolved in me that the art of quilting with cloth and modeling in clay were the same in expression, though different in material. It has been said by the more florid of my commentators that I relinquished the mallet and chisel for the needle. This is a most flagrant piece of flattery, since few sculptors ever cut marble. No, it was in the modeling stage that my needle lured me back to an old love, with the full assurance that in taking up quilting, I would be deserting nothing. Quilting in cloth is the same mentally as modeling in clay, though much more flexible in producibility. For whereas a sculptor needs to stay in lonely, toiling isolation with a monument for company, the quilter may pocket parts of her more compliant material and go from place to place, working wherever she wishes. So then she talks about giving money to Radcliffe, and then she says, "Which do you prefer?" ask my guests. And she's showing quilts, okay. "Which do you prefer?" ask my guests. And I reply, "They are my children. I have no preference. unquote. So she couldn't sculpt it. Cool, right? Isn't that good? I'll send you all this.
Wow.
What's that?
It's just beautifully put. I love that.
I know. And so she couldn't sculpt, and so she started making quilts. Molly, you could go to the next slide. And she called her quilts sculptures in cloth. And she, like she said in that piece, she relinquished, the mallet, or she was saying essentially that sculpting in cloth was more fun, and more fun socially, and more practical for this sculptress that she always wanted to be. And so here are some of the quilts. And as Carolyn mentioned, you can go to the next slide, Molly. Thanks. At the International Quilt Museum, I mean, the most concentrated number of the quilts that Bertha made are located at the IQM. Next slide. And so so these are the quilts that are at the Quilt Museum there in Lincoln. And there's a tragedy connected to Bertha Meckstroth. There is this story sort of has it all. There's tragedy, the agony, the ecstasy of her work. There's a mystery involved and a treasure hunt, basically. So Bertha was making these quilts, and we'll get to some more details of this story, but she made almost 200 or so of her quilts. By her own statement, she said how many, she had made 170 or something. And she made these quilts, and she gave away so many to her family and her friends. She'd had some commissions. And at the end of her life, she wrote a will. And she died in 1960, and her will stated, we'll take a look at the will here in a minute, but she said that she wanted the rest of the quilts that she had in her possession, which were 89, she wanted them to be kept together. And she wanted to have, she wanted them to be stewarded together and to benefit future generations. It's a little bit vague, which caused a problem. But she had saved $70,000 in order to facilitate this collection that she said plainly she wanted her quilts to be kept together. She had a trust fund from Anna, and she invested it really wisely. So there was $70,000 and 89 quilts, okay? She did not name an executor, and she did not have children. So the will the bank became the executor of the will. And the bank didn't care too much about quilts by an old spinster, which is what she was called after that point. And she and the quilts were given away. And I'll talk to you about the details of that. But this group of quilts, so they were scattered to the wind, and we'll get there, like I said. But these quilts at the IQM, I think is there 16 or so, something like that. There's not quite 20, but close to that, and they are exceptional quilts. You could advance, Molly. I don't have my captions on that one. Okay, well the reverse applique was one of the techniques she used quite a bit. And again, in these satins and Chinese silks, just wonderful materials. The quilting, she did not do herself. She designed the quilts, and she chose the fabrics and did all the applique and the stuff work. But they were quilted by a woman who was identified as being in Tennessee or Kentucky, according to one of the documents I have. But Bertha kept this a secret. She did not, announce that she did not do the quilting on these quilts. Next slide. Some of the quilts that she made were fairly traditional, always unusual, always original. I've seen a couple quilts, and there's one at the IQM that's a pretty standard issue, Drunkard's Path, but for the most part, these are pictorial in nature. They are delicate. The lines and the shapes are quite delicate. Next slide, Molly. But she really, really has fun with weird stuff, right? I mean, and by weird, I mean just eccentric, out of the ordinary. The quilt on the right is a crest quilt. That's her initials. If you can make them out, there's a B, an A that has the eagle on top, and an M, Bertha Amelia Meckstroth. And underneath the ribbon says Pulchra et Industria, beautiful and industrious in Latin. And there's gold cording around the edge. And she did a number of these crest quilts, and we'll see another one in a minute. She often made two two of each, slightly different sometimes, but she often made copies, so two of each. The one on the left there is a deer in Wedgwood, absolutely gorgeous. That's the one I think that's in the book, Carolyn, the IQM book. Yeah, just like lace. I mean, it's her needlework was exceptional, and these sculptures. You can really see once you know her background, kind of what she was trying to achieve. Okay, next slide. She put a lot of text into her quilts in Latin, in Aramaic, in English. I don't know if there's Greek or Hebrew anywhere. I don't think so, but I've got a detail shot in the next slide of some of the words down there. Poetry. This is a poem by Longfellow, Castles in Spain. And so she and this poem, take fortune whatever you choose, you gave and may snatch again. I have nothing twould pain me to lose, for I own no more castles in Spain. That's an excerpt from that poem. But this poem appears in many quilts. I found several more quilts where she quotes this poem. Much of the text, and certainly the Mary of Nazareth quilt that you saw at the beginning, the text and the subject matter, deeply religious in nature at a certain point. She had kind of an awakening. I need to know more about that when she began to really lean into her faith and all of that. It's not totally clear. She wrote an unpublished memoir, which I have to say is kind of dry, but there is some in there about it. And anyway, but it's very, very reverent kind of content and just so much text, which is all reverse applique. Okay, next slide. This, I wanted to give a good detail shot of some of this work. This is the silk work, one of the quilts at the Quilt Museum there. And it's creative, it's original, it's finely executed, and just so well thought out. She really was truly an artist. And to see her quilts it's really something. One day, I hope there can be a big exhibit of all these quilts. And the next slide, Molly, this is the back, showing the back. She labeled all of her quilts, yay. And it was a pretty simple ribbon that was printed surely for her by Sears department store. And she put Bertha Meckstroth, the year on the quilts, and Glencoe, Illinois, although a lot of the quilts say Casa Tranquilla on them too, the name that she gave her house. Okay, next slide. So the quilt we saw comes back here. I put it there to show you that in that article, in that newsprint picture, you can see it hanging in the background. And that was from an event at Radcliffe. I think, let's see, is that the picture that went along with the article? I think it is. Bertha got, and you can see the crest there. The gal on the left is holding that crest quilt. And then on the right, that is a quilt with Aramaic on it. Okay. So she got attention for this work. She was not laboring in not isolation. She wasn't laboring in, not promiscuity. What's the word I want? Obscurity. Yeah. She wasn't, obscure with this work. She really found an audience for it. She showed her quilts at tea parties, usually at her house for Radcliffe alumni. She showed quilts at fairs, and she was in the paper quite a bit, pictures of her in the paper. She toured the country at certain times, giving talks on her quilts. She went to Claremont, New Hampshire, a high school in Claremont, New Hampshire. She went there to lecture on her quilts. She went to Buffalo, New York to lecture. And in newspapers.com, you can find announcements of her coming to town to talk about her quilts and show her unusual art form, and they referred to it as an art form. She was an artist. She was seen as such and lauded as such. People thought, this is a new kind of art, sculptures in cloth. And they really, people responded to them very well and were, appropriately, moved by all this work. You can go to the next slide, Molly. Here are just a few examples of announcements in these different papers about her traveling around. And one of the biggest things that happened in her life was that she had a solo show at the Century of Progress fair in 1932-33 in Chicago. And most everyone watching will know about the Century of Progress, the Sears Quilt Contest. But that's just one of the stories of the Century of Progress World's Fair at that time, because Bertha had a show. And in her papers in LSU, there is a guest book, the guest book from the Century of Progress, showing all of the people who came and signed their names and said, oh, I've never seen anything like this. Now, it's also true, like, she knew a guy at the fair, so like her brother hooked her up for sure. But it was very popular. It was repeated by popular demand. And so the next slide there, Molly shows this, she did it. She became the sculptress that she wanted to become ultimately. And this picture is interesting. It's a picture that it's a picture of a picture. I need to get the full scan. But Bertha's great niece and I have made acquaintance. She's a friend at this point, and her husband passed away in November. So I've not been bothering her about my Bertha research, but she is lovely, and she's a quilter, by the way. And so we've been communicating, and she took a picture of this picture that she had in her records of her Aunt Bertie. That's what they called her, Aunt Bertie. And yeah, we'll get back to, she has some quilts. Carolyn. Yeah, I just can't wait to show. I just can't wait. I don't have pictures of them though, because like I said, I didn't want to, we don't know each other well enough for me to be, but I wrote her the other day and I've been in contact with her anyway. So this is
great news.
I know, right? Oh my God. This is really cool. So anyway, so Bertha was, I told you she drove like a, crazy lady. And eventually she really got to the point as she was growing older that it was unsafe for her to drive. And so her license was taken away and she was declared incompetent in 1958. And she went to a sanitarium on the North Shore Hospital, and she passed away there in 1960 at the age of 80. Oh no. Well, she was born in 75, died in 60, so 85. And so the next slide gets into the drama that happened after she died. So I told you what her will said, and she wanted her quilts kept together. And then the probate court ultimately gets that her will is entered into probate court because she didn't name an heir and she didn't have a child, and her family didn't step up to kind of deal with all of this, which, I don't want to judge. People have reasons for doing the things that they do, but it was unfortunate that this happened. So reporters in Chicago or really anywhere, you're going to have people hanging out at the clerk, to city hall, listening for a story or trying to pick up something they could write about. And the reporters got wind of this story that this woman had left her quilts, and $70,000 to make, as they put it, as you can see in the headlines, spinster has an artist's pride, quilt maker leaves works as a memorial. They sensationalized this story, and it was all over the country. It was this silly, this silly woman in her lifetime making work. She was an artist. She was a visionary, but then she dies and people don't respect this work that she did, and they think it's ridiculous and funny. And so the AP Wire, this story about Bertha Meckstroth is in papers in Maine. It's in papers in California. It really got into the news cycle. And one of those spinster wills memorial funds for her sewing. It's outrageous. These kinds of things it's really hard to see this because, she when she died, she didn't have kids. So she's a spinster, she's unmarried. Her quilts went from being sculptures to just being, her sewing or her wall hangings. I don't even know if I've read that they call them that, but they really made fun of her. She was just a woman. She was just a quilter, and it was a juicy story for a little bit. So I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is unbelievable that these quilts were scattered to the wind. And I decided I just had to learn more. And by the way, what happened to the quilts, how they were scattered to the wind was like this. So that the $70,000 ultimately was divided up between the family, and the bank got plenty of it too. And they split the quilts into two halves. Half of the quilts, the 89 quilts that were left, went to Radcliffe. They went to Radcliffe College because that was her alma mater. And the other half of the quilts went to Barat College in Lake Forest, which was a Jesuit school, all women, and I think, yeah, originally at least all women. Bertha had absolutely no relationship to the school. Absolutely none. She didn't go there. She didn't like hang out with people who were there. But the courts decided that it was a local college and that it made sense for them to go to Barat. It is totally weird and heartbreaking because these quilts that she said specifically in her will wanted to be kept together were not. Next slide, Molly. So I live in Chicago, and I was reading about probate court, and I learned that. And so I learned that if something's in probate court, that's a public record. And so I called the circuit court office, county clerk, and asked if I could request to see the probate record of Bertha Meckstroth, who passed away in 1960. And the lady was like, sure, yeah, okay, here's your number. We'll let you know when it arrives. Well, that is the probate record. And Molly, if you show the next slide, that's me at the circuit court. I think I'm saying that wrong. The county, it's downtown, right, near City Hall, where you can go in and look at these records. And so it was last year, maybe last spring, a year ago, probably. I went down there and I saw it all. So the next slide will show you. That's the will. The will is in there. Of course it's in there. And I had been hearing about this will. I had been, reading about it, and there it is. And I can read it to you. It's very short. It says, the will of Bertha Amelia Meckstroth. And then in all capital letters, of course, this is typed on a typewriter. In all capital letters, it says, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And it's very ominous. It's like, this is my will. You better, it's pretty intense. And it's dated July 24th, 1956. And there's three witnesses. It's cut off there on the close-up of it, but there's three witnesses. I can tell you more about that. But it says, quote, whereas all my close relatives and friends have received tokens of my affection in one or more quilts, and through the giving away of 46 in number, I evolved into the making of some 120 more, many of which are either copies of rare designs in different colors and under various names. They should be husbanded in such a group as could be preserved intact. Their housing has been tentatively planned. And whereas this disposition thereof necessitates both hall and living quarters for which the money I and the quilts have saved during many years shall be made a memorial, I will both the furnishings and the quiltings to the memorial for my antecedents in my gratitude. Unquote, Bertha Meckstroth. And okay, next slide, Molly.
This is so sad. This is just so sad that her family just disregarded it when she was so perfectly clear.
I know. So this is kind of I put this slide together, pages from the transcripts of the hearing. There was a hearing about this because the bank contested the will, right? They contested the will. They said, and this is fascinating conversation in court between the lawyer representing the bank and the judge, Judge Roberts, who was overseeing this hearing. And basically, the bank says, talk about insulting, Carolyn, it's devastating. It's like the lawyer for the bank says, this woman did not state where this memorial should be, did not state how it should be built, where it should be built. And he says at one point, she wanted this to be this charitable act. And he says, in my time as a lawyer, I have written many fine briefs. And this is no more, it would be ridiculous for me to say I wanted my best briefs put into a memorial for my, it's just like, oh, you can't believe it. It's like, get the popcorn, like this transcript is so crazy. And the judge says, I read here that this woman, Bertha Meckstroth, exhibited her quilts at the Century of Progress. Surely this suggests that there is value in her work, and that if that many people were interested in her work, then there is, and he says, surely we could appoint an executor. The court could appoint someone to work on this. And he says, there's $70,000 here. It is possible for us to carry out her wishes. Ultimately, the bank won, and they they, like I said, they divided the quilts between Barat College and Radcliffe College. The money went to the family. I mean, there's copies of the checks in the probate record. It's all there. It's fascinating. So interesting. Carolyn, I said something at QuiltCon, and I didn't know if I should say it, and I said it, I got a laugh, so I'll say it here. But like teenagers kind of think, and I feel like researchers, when I'm fine, I finally am just like, oh, I want to research this so much, and research is so fun, and people have been doing it forever. They're like, yeah, it's really fun. And it's like, it's got me so bad now, wanting to just spend all my time with this, and it's so exciting and interesting. Anyway, so the quilts get split up, and then so then the museum has some of them, but like, where did they go? That's the question. It's like, where did the quilts go once they were at Radcliffe, once they were at Barat? Radcliffe, I can tell you, auctioned off all of the quilts within months to raise money for the college. So when I say scattered to the wind, I mean it. I mean scattered to the wind. Barat College was demolished in I got it because I had to. They closed in like 2005. DePaul University here in Chicago absorbed their stuff. Have I gotten in touch with DePaul? You bet I have. And then the building was raised in like 2017 or something like that. So that's troublesome, But I've decided that I've got to find as many as possible. Next slide, Molly. This is the section I call the hunt, the hunt for the quilts. And the next slide, actually, the reason why I mentioned I'd really like to write about Bertha. At one point, this is an article from somewhere in the 1940s, I believe. And the headline says, "Artist designs applique quilts on many themes. Visitor here will publish illustrated book on art." And she wanted to make a book. Bertha wanted to make a book. She wanted to call it The Singing Needle, which was the name of her exhibition at the Century of Progress, The Singing Needle. And she wanted to make a book. And I feel like if I can get enough of the quilts together, I can do it. I can make a book. And I imagine it, an oversized, a beautiful book with pictures of all of her quilts, professionally, taken, of course, hopefully by the Quilt Museum. And there's so much to the story. And I've done so much research and I have so much more to go. It's, after the QuiltCon lecture, people were like, "When does the book come out?" I'm like, no. I don't have it. I'm not there yet, but that's the goal, right? So why find all these quilts? Well, because they're works of art, but also because, because it's justice maybe at the end. Okay, next slide. So I found some more. So there's the IQM quilts. This quilt is called Under His Wings, and it's at the Shelburne. So I've been combing everything I can, in all kinds of ways, newspapers and the internet, and then all of the primary sources I have, which I'm going to talk about. So Under His Wings is exceptionally quilted. It's absolutely gorgeous. And this is the only one that the Shelburne has, and it's wonderful. So next slide. Going through an AQS catalog, an exhibition catalog, 20th century quilts. It was sometime in the 90s. Questa Benberry and maybe it was Joyce Gross curated an exhibit at AQS or for AQS, and this quilt on the left was pictured in the catalog. And I was just looking through the catalog because I'm just nerdy like that. And I was going through some old stuff I have in my office. And there it was. There's one of these Castles in Spain quilts. So I have to figure out where this quilt is, but it was published in that museum catalog. So that's really good. And it's really hard to know what to do next. I mean, there's so many leads to follow and so many things to do. I haven't located where that quilt is yet, but it's out there. This one on the right, this one is called July. So she did a series of months of the year. And by the way, I should tell you too, I have inventories. I have a number of inventories to work from to know which quilts are called which, and descriptions of them when she died. All 89 quilts were inventoried. Most of them were priced at about $10 a piece, by the way. Overall, I did the average for 89 quilts. They all came out to about $42 a piece. Yeah. And so this one, so I have all these inventories. I have a roadmap and to find them, and the months of the year. This quilt, I found it in the Quilt Index on accident. No, by accident. I was looking for something else, and when I entered Meckstroth into the Quilt Index, I found the article by Joyce Gross, which you should all read. It's wonderful. But I don't know how I came upon this, but it was found in the Massachusetts Quilt Documentation Project. It's in there, July, and it's amazing. So already, okay, with this Shelburne and these, okay, we've got 3. We found 3. And this, the next slide, Molly, I found one of these, and Carolyn, we have to talk about this one when we get offline, but this is a barn in Iowa. And in newspapers.com, one day I was trolling through there, and I found a mention of Bertha Meckstroth in the Des Moines Register in 2000 and, I don't know, 7 or something like that, some time ago. And it said that at Living History Farms, there was going to be a quilt show. And Living History Farms, I grew up in Winterset, Iowa. It's like 40 minutes away from Living History Farms, which is one of those, places where you go and you pet the goats and you see how the, people back in pioneer days lived. And, I went on a million field trips to the Living History Farms. So in that article about the quilt show at Living History Farms, they said a quilt by Bertha Meckstroth, who had quilts at the Century of Progress, in 1933, a quilt by Bertha Meckstroth will be part of the show. And it had this little corner of a Bertha Meckstroth quilt. So I was like, ah! So I email Living History Farms, next slide, Molly, and I say, and the quilt show was from their permanent collection. That's so important because the Living History Farms keeps some quilts, and so it was from their permanent collection. So I get in touch with the curator and I say, is it true? Do you have a Bertha Meckstroth? She's like, oh yeah, and I was in Iowa visiting Mom. And so Mom and I went to Living History Farms, and that quilt is in that barn that you just saw. Well, barn, it's their textile storage facility, but it was a barn at one point. This quilt is a copy of the one that is at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, that I first saw at this at this Fabric of a Nation in that book. So this is the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and those are bats around the corner. Those are bats, or around the scalloped edge, and you can't see it on this picture. Whoops! But she quilted in, or her lady quilted in spider web quilt motif. It's fascinating. And Bertha had a relationship to bats. She saw them as being sort of having religious connotations. I don't have time to go into it too much, but this is next slide, Molly. This is a copy of that quilt. It's Easter Cross, and there's Casa Tranquilla on the back, 1932, I believe. So it's the real McCoy. So now we got 4. Okay, next slide. This one is going to blow you away. So the woman who there's 2 big sources for Bertha. There's the Joyce Gross piece, and then there's Bertha's papers, of course. But there was an article written for the Winnetka Fortnightly paper in the 1960s by Bertha's friend Margaret McGregor Maggie, and she was the one who said Bertha looked like Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. So she went to Radcliffe. This is Margaret McGregor Maggie, and she wrote Bertha's story. It's a monograph. It's quite long, and and it was Joyce Gross's source as well back when she wrote her piece. And she interviewed Margaret McGregor Maggie for her piece. Joyce Gross did, and so this woman knew so much about it. Well, she's long passed away, but my friend Kathy Blacklock, love you so much, Kathy, helped me with Ancestry.com, and we found that Margaret had 4 children, and one of them, her youngest, is alive and well and living in Minnesota. So I sent her a copy of the Minnesota issue of Quilt Folk because I thought, well, she'll enjoy it, hopefully, and also my picture's in there, so I look like a legitimate person, because I was editor at that time when we went to Minnesota. So I'm like, dear Mrs. I forget her last name. She got married. She's in her 80s, this lady. And I explained who I was and what I was doing. And she emailed me back when she got the package, and she said, yes, I have one of the Bertha quilts. My mother hung this quilt up in every bedroom she ever had our whole lives. It's called Sleep Sweet, and it's this beautiful verse about sleep sweet, under the banner in this quiet room or something. She said my mother suffered from insomnia, and looking at this quilt made her happy, and she could fall asleep. Next slide. So I don't have a full picture of I mean, I don't have a great picture, but so that's the quilt hanging above the mantle in her mother's room, Margaret McGregor Maggie. And she said, and I said, where's the quilt now? I mean, that's always the question, is like, oh, where is it now? And she said, when my mom died, I have to be honest, it was kind of heavy, with like my mom, it just, I wanted to give it to someone. And she said, I gave it to my nephew and his wife, and I can get in touch with them and see if they still have it. And I said, thank you very much. Please let me know. And they do have it. Next slide. It is hanging in their house in Italy. Yeah, so it's there, and that's really exciting. And Carolyn, we might have to go to Italy. You know what I mean? I mean, it's going to be hard, but maybe.
I'm ready to sacrifice.
Yes, I mean, we'll bring him a nice gift basket, and we can stay.
Yeah.
So there's another one. Okay, next slide. I don't want to take too long, but this is when it gets really good. I mean, it's getting good. So newspapers.com, they earn every penny that they make. Okay. So and Mary Kay Waldvogel has done research on Bertha too, a good deal of it. And she sent me her papers at one point that she had her file. And I saw an article in her file, and also then on newspapers.com, about a quilt shop, the Walrus Quilt Shop, in 1978. So the paper in 1978 said that there would be a quilt show at the Fox Valley or Hawthorne shopping mall coming up. And 32 quilts by the famous Bertha Meckstroth of Glencoe, who had a Century of Progress quilt exhibition, will be on display, loaned by Barat College. 32. These two women were the owners of the Walrus Quilt Shop, Barbara Leach on the left and Barbara Benson on the right. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and get in touch with one of these women or both of these women. Barbara Leach has passed away, but Barbara Benson is alive and well and living in Barrington, Illinois. And I wrote to her and I sent her something else, that proved that I was, a person who really cared about this, cared about quilts. And she called me and she said, "Oh, Mary," I mean, she's 86 or something, but she said, "Oh, Mary, I'm so happy." She's from England, "that you're interested in Bertha Meckstroth. My goodness." And so I went out to her house in Barrington and sat with her and talked with her. And she's so lovely. And we're in communication too. In fact, when you see what happened just last week, you'll know why I have to write to Barbara again. She gave me everything she had. She doesn't have any quilts. She doesn't have any quilts herself, but she gave me her whole file on the quilt show and all of her correspondence with Sister Mary Burke at Barat College. And what they did in 78 is Sister Mary Burke came to Barbara Benson and let me say, oh yeah, you can advance, Molly. This is a clipping from Barbara Benson's file about the quilt show. She saved everything. And by the way, it's been so rewarding to reach out to these people and let them know somebody cares about what they did. I mean, Barbara thought, who knew that this, young upstart, would, well, not that young, but come to her and say, "I really am so interested in what you did and I want to know everything." And of course I said, "I don't want to take any of your material, but I'll scan it and FedEx it back to you." And she said, "No, please, take it." And so the next slide, she had press photos. That's Sister Mary Burke, Sister Mary Burke was at Barat. And I said, "Barbara, you got the quilts from Barat. Like who, how did that happen? Where were they?" And Sister Mary Burke said that she one day opened up a closet and there were all of these quilts stuffed into a closet. They were just rolled up and stuffed into a closet at the college. And so she saw them, how beautiful they were. And so she got in touch with someone who knew Barbara Leach, who had a quilt shop. And, that's how it happened. So you can see that's one of the quilts on the right, the brown and cream. That's at the Quilt Museum. And this is a picture from the press release about the show. And that's Mary Burke holding up another Madonna and Child, which is different. These are two different quilts, and you can see the one the Quilt Museum has, I think, is a finer example. But I mean, like I said, she made these copies. She made different ones. Okay, next slide, Molly. Here's another crest quilt. There's Sister Mary Burke, who sounded like she was just lovely, a lovely lady. This is another Bertha Amelia Meckstroth crest quilt, but you can see, so up in the corners, those are They look like bees, but it says on the back of the photo, it says bats. And the scissors up at the top, I just love, it's just so cool. So there's pictures of these, a number of these quilts. And the next slide, please. This one, never seen this one before. This is a house to dwell in a settled place for thee to abide in forever. So it's from the Bible. And I mean, I should have maybe given a detail shot. The embroidery down along either side of it's obviously a figure from the Bible. I don't know who, Joseph, I'm not sure. But there's embroidery of people walking, marching, or gathering. Those are human figures down there. And I've never seen embroidery like that on a Bertha quilt. I had not seen it until then. So here's another visual we have, of a quilt. Where is it? I don't know yet, but maybe we can all work together to find it. Okay, next slide. And also in Barbara's file was this piece of onion skin paper, actually 2 sheets, of list of Bertha Meckstroth quilts loaned for the Hawthorne Center quilt exhibit. So another inventory. Okay, so this is essentially Barat's inventory, or at least a good amount of it. And you can see I said, Barbara, again, where are the quilts? Barbara, where are the quilts? And she said, well, I don't know. We sold some of them, and the money went to Barat, I'm pretty sure. But this is just a detail of the inventory. But she puts a line through them when they were sold, and you can see the prices there have gone up a little bit, $300, $200, and the measurements and the names. And so the titles of the quilt, I can absolutely correspond, to the other inventories that I have. And so, I said, did you write down the names perhaps of the people who bought them? And she said, no, we didn't do that. But, my husband said, he's like, look, this was a pretty swanky suburb, and people who would go in and buy a quilt for $400, and knew what they were looking at, and had the taste, to know that it was worth purchasing. He's like, you could just start calling the zip code, just cold calling, like in that particular zip code, and see if anybody knows anything. And I'll do that. I'll cold call people, and I'll get my pitch down real tight, so they don't just hang up on me, but they probably will. But it's interesting. I mean, people wouldn't be coming from all over the country to this show. These kinds of things make this project possible to actually find more of these quilts. Okay, next slide. And then there's this. We're wrapping it up soon here. But this is, it's just so fun to talk about it. Look at this. So on that inventory, under one of these quilts, it says quilted by Susie Wilson, Turin, Kentucky. It's the only name that I have found so far connected in any way to quilting on any of these quilts. Now, it only says it under one of them, which is odd. And Bertha didn't put anybody's name on the back of her quilts, as we know. But this is huge because, and my friend Kathy, again, is helping me so much. We started looking into Susie Wilson. The Turin, Kentucky doesn't exist anymore. Once we figured that out, that was helpful. But we found some records that may be helping us. Genealogy people, I mean, I say at the end of the talk, like Mary@maryfons.com, like if you have ideas, leads, anything, if you want to help, there's a bunch of people now who are kind of looking in their spare time because it's addictive. But Susie Wilson, she was in Kentucky, and we started looking around. I mean, Margaret Caden and all of her, her quilting people, Kentucky and Tennessee were just hotbeds of really, really, really talented quilt makers at that time. So it's like, that's a huge lead to try to find different communities and groups of women who were doing quilting. I mean, it's beautiful. This is a beautiful clue for the investigation. Okay. And then, so a couple weeks ago at QuiltCon, I talked a little bit more about a few other things, but I had not yet done, you can go to the next slide, Molly, the research that I did last week. I wish I could have done it before QuiltCon, but there was just no way to do it. I was down in Austin, Texas, and I went to the Briscoe Center. So the University of Texas at Austin has the Briscoe Center for American History. And the great Joyce Gross, quilt scholar and author of the Bertha article, she donated all of her papers and all of her quilts, as far as I know, to the Briscoe Center. You can advance the slide. So they have all of Joyce's papers there. And I had the occasion to go down to Austin last week or 2 weeks ago. And I requested to look at the Bertha Meckstroth file in the Joyce Groves papers at the Briscoe Center. And sure enough, oh my gosh, it was so exciting. I mean, I spent 3 hours in the special collections room, and I mean, I was bouncing off the seat. What I found in Joyce's file was like, okay, advance the slide. I just got 5 slides left. Yeah. She has newspaper clippings that ain't on newspapers.com. She's got this quilt, by the way. So that's Margaret McGregor Maggie on the right, who I'd never seen a picture of. Sister Mary Burke, another one of the sisters, and probably the president of Barat. The caption would say, but it's cut off here. That quilt is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. These deer running in a circle, and then the under the bower. It's so pretty. And what I can do is I can look at the inventory from her death, at the time of her death, and I can find, because they described the person who inventoried the estate described each quilt, and so I can find out which one this was called. I want to let you know too that the Radcliffe auction, because it's Radcliffe and it was fancy, all the women who were at the tea, who were at the auction, their names were in the paper. So that's another way to find the children who would have quilts that their mothers had purchased at that auction. I've got a list of names. It's amazing. Okay, next slide. Joyce went to Barat College when there was a showing of the quilts, because Barat did an exhibition. Forget what year. I forget what year. I'll have to look. But she took some pictures of some of the quilts that were hanging. These are pictures of her pictures. The pictures aren't awesome, but to me, they're the best pictures that I've ever seen, because there are these other quilts. The one on the left, Our Father who art in heaven, it's the full Lord's Prayer. It is so beautiful. It is so beautiful. And of course, all of these are in the inventory. And that middle one, that's a detail shot. Again, Castles in Spain is the poem that's embroidered there or appliqued there. This one on the right, the pink, and I can't. It's so beautiful. Okay, next slide. This is another month of the year. This was a detail shot. I don't have, Joyce didn't take or doesn't have a picture of the full quilt, but we saw the July quilt. This one is February. We've got bats and spider webs again on this. Okay, next one. So the Polaroid there was some woman in the suburbs of Chicago had this hanging on her wall. I've got the notes. I mean, Joyce's notes, handwritten notes, typed up notes. It was so much fun. And it was just so exciting to look through all of her work. And I can only hope that I can add to this. And it's just, yeah, it was really neat to just be with her papers at all, because I have so much respect for her and what she did in her lifetime. But the Daughters of the Connecticut there on the left, beautiful. And I've seen a copy of that quilt too. And then the quilt on the right, the far right, is one that's in the IQM, Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. And that is another version there in the middle that I had never seen in black and cream. I mean, it's a treasure hunt. It is so much fun. I mean, yeah, the librarians were like looking at me weird, but actually no, because they understood, when you're doing this research. Okay, one more. I've got one more, and then a fun announcement. But this one might be my favorite Bertha Meckstroth quilt of all time. It's the spacious firmament on high. The way she did the text in black, and it's got a black border around it, and the stars, it's cool. That's the only thing. It's so cool. She was so cool. This black text and this Gothic font and the stars sort of sprinkled across. It's just a quilt, you know what I mean? And I'm so interested in this woman and her life and the injustice, that befell her. So the last, Molly, you can go to the next one. The leads that I have, I talked a little bit about them, but there's so many names in Joyce's file of people who she found, had a quilt, and these people are gone now, but this is artwork. And if the parent, purchased this, like Margaret McGregor Maggie's daughter knew that this was special and she wasn't just going to, throw it out. So it's highly, highly likely that once I'm, able to follow all these leads and continue the work, I will continue to find these quilts. I absolutely will. And I mentioned that Lonnie is Bertha's great niece, and she does have 3 quilts. One of them is in really bad shape. Actually, it's 2 quilts, I think, and a pillow sham, which is on Bertha's inventory back in like 1933. Yeah, I just gotta keep going on this. And the next slide is what I wanted to say. I mean, if you have any information, if you know anything, if you want to start cold calling people, from Fox Valley, from the suburbs of Chicago, let's work together on the script and the pitch and see what we can do. And then, I really would love to hear from you. And then the last thing is the announcement. The last thing is the announcement, and that is, okay, next slide.
Wow.
I haven't said it like publicly, but I applied for PhD programs, Carolyn, I was telling you, in American Studies, because I want to write about quilts at a scholarship level, and really be able to do the work I want to do in that capacity. It's time for me. I'm 44, and I've been, I went back to get my master's when I was 37. I've been at work again, and I know this is the path I want to take. So I applied to 6 schools. I got into 3, and the past 2 weeks I was on the campus visits, and that's why I was down at the University of Texas at Austin to go to the campus visit, and that was why I was able to tag a little time on and go to the Briscoe Center. Friday, I accepted their offer. It's full scholarship, and
congratulations! That's so great.
And I'll be with Joyce's papers, and it's so cool. I'm really excited. I worked so hard. Oh my God, it was so challenging, to get everything right, but it paid off. And so now we're going to get a little apartment down there in Austin, and we're going to stay in Chicago too. But I'll be down there for school in the fall.
Oh, that's wonderful. And oh my gosh, Mary, this is just incredible.
Good, right?
And all the research you've done and the quilts you found, it's just really amazing.
It's so much fun. It's like talking about it like this, Carolyn, I realize how much I've done, but I mean, it's just been so fun. I'm like, oh yeah, there really is a lot now,
It's a lot, but I think you're right on the right track, and your genealogy is going to take you a lot of places. Yes. And so I'm sure there's more quilts to find. We did have one question about how the IQM came across our quilts, and Jonathan Holstein had acquired a Bertha Meckstroth, the deer in Wedgwood, long ago, and so he was just playing around looking for her, and a dealer who collected amazing different collections had acquired some pieces. So we contacted her and kind of begged and said, she was very attached to the quilt. She wasn't sure she wanted to let them go, but she's at an age where she felt like it was a good move for her. So we got 14 of them from her. And she did not reveal her source, but if she had 14, you kind of wonder if she was at one of these sales, one of these auctions.
Yes. I think it was the Barat show, Carolyn, because a lot of like the star, I'll show you, like what Joyce was taking pictures of. I wonder if it was that show that lady was at, because there a lot, like the peacock was there, and but anyway.
So probably the connection. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is incredible, Mary, and I hope everybody can get the word out. Her quilts were always labeled, and they're also unique. And it's so interesting, too, that I think it just says something a lot about what she's doing, that she made them in a very different size. She did not want them to be considered a bed quilt.
Exactly.
They were her sculpture items. Yep. So it was interesting that she made them in that narrow format, a banner rather than a quilt format.
Exactly. And that actually reminds me, someone had such a great suggestion. I mean, that's why it's fun to like crowdsource this activity, because people have such great ideas. Someone, a friend of mine from the Quilt Nerd gang, they said, find out which church she went to, because surely she gave quilts to her church, because they were religious in nature. I was like, that's such a great idea. I don't know what church she went to yet, but I'm able to find that stuff, so those ideas are so fun. And because the banners, you can just see them hanging in a church.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And, we have a great genealogical team, our genealogical task force, they call themselves. So Joan Laughlin, who was a former professor in the TMFD department, textile merchandising and fashion design, when I was a student, is incredible. And she would be really excited to help you. I would love so if you have a couple of tasks you wanted to put her on.
I do.
She's tenacious. She doesn't give up easily.
Yeah. She'll make it her life's mission until she finds it all, and then she'll go on to the next life mission. I mean, she's pretty great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I just love these research stories, because it really is inspiring. And if you just let it kind of, lay itself out in front of you and follow up all the leads.
Yeah.
I mean, look how much you found already. That's just incredible.
They're out there, they're out there. And if I went and, if I was going and going, I couldn't find any, it would be pretty, disheartening, but that's not the way it is. Like, there is a trail, out there. She was in the paper so much. So yeah, it's actually kind of a good first deep research project for me, because there's a lot, most of them are probably way harder, but since there's newspaper, I mean, I think it's not only is it really interesting, I got a lot of sources. I don't have to, anyway, you know what I mean? It's like a lot of research projects are going to be a lot harder, and that's good. But this one's,
it's just great. I'm just so glad you're doing the research, because really some of those connections are going to be gone. And then that does just, the connections disappear and we'd never know. So, well, Mary, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being on today. We are not back. We're on a quarterly schedule now. So we'll be back in June with our next textile talk. So I hope you join us again. And of course, this is recorded and you can watch again if you'd like on the AQSG site. So, I'm going to go back and look at all your sources and look at all those quilts. They're so cool.
Yeah. Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy your St. Patty's Day. I'm wearing my green. Luck of the Irish. So
okay. Bye, y'all. Thank you. Thanks, Carolyn.
See you next time. Bye-bye.